Do you think other Democrats are watching their words?
I think it's certainly possible.
Some Republican, or many perhaps, will be watching this. You are the guys who are weaponizing the Justice Department. How would you respond to somebody who may be thinking that?
In what way?
AOC walked into this interview sounding confident, but the longer it went on, the more it felt like she was trying to build the argument while already falling through the floor. And that is what makes this whole exchange so fascinating. It was not some hostile ambush. It was not some gotcha circus. It was a straightforward interview with fair questions, basic follow-ups, and multiple chances to make a clean, persuasive case. And somehow, even with all that room, she still ended up sounding evasive, defensive, and completely unprepared for the most obvious pushback in the world. So today we're breaking down exactly why this interview hit so differently, what it reveals about the Democratic message right now, and why moments like this matter way more than the media wants to admit. And hey, if you like commentary that cuts through the spin and gets right to the point, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. What really jumps out here is not just what AOC said, it is how she said it. The pattern was impossible to miss. Every time she was pressed on something uncomfortable, she did that thing politicians do when they know the talking point is weaker than it sounded in the mirror. She stalled. She reframed. She tried to turn the question into a different question. She reached for dramatic language, authoritarian, kleptocracy, calling their bluff, big cinematic words, the kind of language that sounds powerful on social media, sounds impressive at a fundraiser, and probably gets a standing ovation in certain circles. But in a real interview with real follow-up questions, that kind of rhetoric starts to wobble pretty fast when the person across from you asks the most dangerous thing in politics. Okay, what do you mean exactly? And that is where things got interesting, because once the interviewer brought up the obvious Republican response, that Democrats were the ones weaponizing the Justice Department, AOC did not have a smooth answer. She did not have a prepared line. She did not even seem ready for the question at all. Instead, she responded with confusion. In what way? And that right there was one of the most revealing moments of the whole conversation. Really? In what way? You are a national political figure. You are talking about fear, intimidation, institutions, and abuse of power, and you are genuinely surprised that people on the other side think the last few years looked like selective prosecution and political lawfare. You do not have to agree with that argument to know it exists. In fact, if you are serious about politics, you should know the other side's argument better than they do. That is basic stuff. That is debate 101. If you are going to accuse your opponents of authoritarian behavior, maybe be prepared when someone asks why millions of Americans think your side crossed that line first.
I'm interested if you or your fellow Democrats are at all feeling intimidated or silenced or anything.
I'm not. I think it's important to call this administration's bluff. I think that this is what authoritarians do. I think this is what kleptocracies do. But we will only find out if we call their bluff.
Do you think other Democrats are watching their words?
I think it's certainly possible, but I'm not sure. I mean, I cannot think of or point to any individuals who have said that. I do think that there are Democratic members of Congress who are preparing for that possibility.
How do they prepare?
I think they look to the possibility of litigation. I think they're saying, you know, do we have the best teams possible in order to carry out our work.
That is what made her answer land so badly. It was not just weak, it felt disconnected from reality. And look, this is the bigger issue with a lot of Democratic messaging right now. They keep acting like their critics are fringe weirdos making up concerns out of thin air, when in reality, a huge number of ordinary voters have been raising the same questions for years. Was the Justice Department applied evenly? Were prosecutions purely about principle? Or were politics clearly in the room? Were institutions being used in a way that looked neutral or in a way that looks strategic? These are not crazy questions. These are mainstream questions. Whether you agree with every conclusion is a separate issue, but pretending the concern itself is unserious? That is exactly how you lose credibility. Then AOC tried to retreat to the Trump was convicted by a jury line, which is obviously the standard defense. And sure, that line works on cable news. It works in partisan bubbles. It works in spaces where nobody is allowed to ask the next question. But the next question matters. The process process matters, the legal theory matters, the timing matters, the surrounding political environment matters. People are not just reacting to the final headline, they are reacting to the full picture. And that is what a lot of Democrats still do not seem to understand. You cannot just point to the existence of a court case and assume that settles every concern. In politics, perception is reality for millions of voters, and if a large chunk of the country believes the legal system was being pulled into partisan warfare, then dismissing them as sore losers is not a strategy. It is an escape hatch. It is a way to avoid grappling with the fact that trust in institutions has cratered, and a lot of that damage did not happen by accident. That is why this interview mattered. It exposed something deeper than one awkward answer. It exposed how fragile the broader narrative really is, because when you take the slogans away, when you strip out the applause lines, when you remove the friendly setting and the familiar script, what are you left with? In this case, not much. Just indignation, vagueness, and the hope that emotionally charged language will carry the moment.
Some Republican, or many perhaps, will be watching this, listening to this, and thinking, wait a minute, actually, you're the ones who are prosecuting us. You are the guys who are weaponizing the Justice Department. How would you respond to somebody who may be thinking that?
In what way? In what way? Is the very presence
Putting
of
Trump on trial would be their example, I suppose.
Yes. I mean, here's the deal. In the United States, there is a jury where we are judged by our peers, and he was found guilty in court on 34 felony charges. If people want to say it was weaponized, I mean, it is hard-pressed to say that there's a partisan argument for that.
But wait, it gets even better when the conversation moves to immigration, because this is where the contradictions really start piling up. The interviewer asked a simple question that cuts right to the heart of the political problem. Why has immigration become such a losing issue for Democrats with working-class voters? Again, not a trick question, not some right-wing trap. This is basic electoral reality. If large numbers of voters in swing states, border communities, and even blue areas are frustrated, concerned, and changing their voting behavior, then maybe the issue is not just messaging. Maybe the issue is the actual situation on the ground. But instead of answering directly, AOC did another familiar sidestep. She got hung up on the word problem, and you could almost feel the conversation slowing down in real time. That move is classic modern politics. Do not engage the issue, engage the wording. Do not wrestle with the substance. Challenge the framing, buy time, soften the impact, blur the edges. It is the verbal equivalent of throwing smoke into the room and hoping nobody notices you still did not answer the question. Because the real question was obvious. Why did so many voters feel like Democrats were not serious about border security, immigration enforcement, or the visible disorder tied to the issue? That is the question, and it is a question Democrats keep trying to answer with process talk, legislative nostalgia, and blame shifting. Then came the bipartisan bill defense, which has basically become the go-to line anytime this subject comes up. You know the pitch. There was a bill. Republicans blocked it, therefore Republicans wanted the chaos. End of discussion. Except not really, because voters are not stupid, and a lot of them noticed something very important. Suddenly, after years of downplaying the crisis, minimizing the consequences, and acting like concern over the border was mostly a moral failing, the same people who had shrugged off the issue started sounding alarmed right when it became politically toxic. That is not a great look, and this is why the bill argument never lands the way Democrats think it should, because to a lot of Americans it did not look like leadership. It looked like panic. It looked like the political class realizing that the issue they had spent years managing rhetorically was now exploding in public opinion. It looked less like we are finally solving this and more like, uh-oh, voters are noticing. That distinction matters. People can smell sincerity. They can also smell damage control from a mile away. And once again, the interviewer did something refreshingly rare. He did not just nod along and move on. He kept pushing. He kept grounding the conversation in actual political consequences. Arizona, Colorado, working class voters, swing voters, public frustration, chaos, lawlessness. Who is looking out for me? That is the language of real people living in the real world, not consultants in a green room.
To what extent is immigration as an issue part of your problem with working class voters?
I mean, I guess my question would be what does the word problem mean?
People voting for the other side and not for you.
Yeah.
Feeling that Democrats are not serious about the issue in ways that concern them.
I think that we have a problem on immigration because of the lack of progress that we've had on this issue. And as we know, Republicans weaponized that lack of progress. Of course, there was famously a bipartisan bill last year that the Republican majority in the Senate and also in the House were willing to pass. President Biden was willing to work with them on it. And Donald Trump said, do not solve this problem. As long as it is broken, then it will be politically beneficial for us. And so it is a problem not just for Democrats. It's a problem for the entire country that Republicans do not want to solve.
They do want to address undocumented people by removing them. I mean, that's what the president is attempting now.
Because here's the truth that elites hate hearing. Voters do not experience immigration as an abstract seminar topic. They experience it through disorder, overwhelmed services, legal confusion, economic pressure, and the feeling that the people in charge either do not see the problem or refuse to speak honestly about it. That does not mean every concern is perfectly expressed. It does not mean every voter has a detailed policy brief in their back pocket. It means they know when something feels off. And for years, many Democrats treated that feeling like a moral defect instead of a democratic signal. That was a huge mistake. Then AOC moved into the visa overstay argument, which is one of those talking points that always shows up right on cue. And yes, visa overstays are part of the immigration picture. Nobody serious denies that. But watch how that point often gets used. It is rarely brought up to expand the conversation honestly. It is usually brought up to redirect attention away from the southern border and away from the visible political damage of years of lax enforcement, mixed messaging, and systemic failure. That is the trick. Take a real point, then use it as a shield against the larger point voters are actually reacting to. And again, that is why the exchange mattered so much, because the interviewer was not letting her hide in abstractions. He kept bringing it back to political reality. If your argument is so strong, why are you losing people over this? If voters are seeing disorder, why are they not buying your explanation? If your side is handling this responsibly, why does so much of the country feel the opposite? Those are brutal questions, not because they are unfair, but because they are unavoidable. And that is what makes this such a damaging moment for AOC specifically. She is supposed to be one of the sharpest communicators on the left. She is supposed to be media savvy. She is supposed to thrive in these settings. If even she cannot make the case cleanly when a relatively fair interviewer starts pressing for specifics, what does that say about the strength of the argument itself? Seriously, think about that. This was not some viral hearing clip with people shouting over each other. This was not one of those 10-second fragments designed to strip away context. This was context. This was time. This was room to explain. And with all that room, the result still felt thin. That tells you a lot. It tells you that too much of the current Democratic message depends on emotional labeling instead of persuasive reasoning. It tells you that too much of their strategy relies on assuming the audience already shares all of their premises. It tells you that when they run into an interviewer who is calm, informed, and unwilling to play the role of unpaid publicist, the whole thing suddenly looks a lot less sturdy.
Why do you think this issue did seem to be a political loser for Democrats among key groups and key constituencies, if what you say is true?
I think that a lack of a path to citizenship in the United States, the lack of addressing comprehensive immigration reform, creates a large population of undocumented people in the United States. And that is allowed to be weaponized in many ways. We have a large population of undocumented people in the United States. Overwhelmingly, it is not because they crossed the southern border of the United States. It's because they came here in a documented fashion and overstayed a visa and became undocumented. And it is the lack of ability for us to expand paths to citizenship.
And you have voters in places like Arizona, which is a swing state that Democrats lost, or Colorado, which is generally a blue state, saying there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of lawlessness.
Yes.
I don't know what to do here. Who's looking out after me?
And maybe that is why these moments resonate with people, because viewers are starving for honesty. They are tired of talking points stacked on top of talking points until the original issue disappears. They are tired of being told not to believe their own eyes. They are tired of being scolded for noticing noticing obvious contradictions. When a politician starts dodging, people feel it instantly. When an answer sounds rehearsed but still incomplete, people know. When someone tries to swap clarity for moral grandstanding, it lands with a thud. That is exactly what happened here. And to be fair, this is not just an AOC problem. She is just one of the clearest examples of a bigger trend. A lot of prominent Democrats talk like the internet is real life. They speak in hashtags. They build arguments for applause, not scrutiny. They assume passion can replace precision. But the minute those arguments leave the safety of a friendly echo chamber, the gaps become impossible to miss. That is why the tone of this interview was so important. Calm questions, fair prompts, clear pushback, no theatrics needed, just enough pressure to reveal whether the message can actually stand on its own. And in this case, it really could not. So what is the takeaway? Honestly, it is pretty simple. When a politician responds to obvious concerns with deflection, when they answer direct questions with semantic detours, and when they rely on sweeping labels instead of concrete explanations, they are telling you something whether they mean to or not. They are telling you the sales pitch is stronger than the substance. They are telling you the performance matters more than the proof. They are telling you they are more comfortable accusing than accounting. And voters are picking up on that. That is why moments like this matter more than 1,000 polished clips. Not because one interview changes everything overnight, but because it adds to a growing sense that the people pushing these narratives are not nearly as confident once somebody starts asking basic follow-ups. The image is polished, the branding is polished, the certainty is polished, but underneath all that polish, the argument can still be shaky. And when the argument is shaky, all the dramatic language in the world cannot save it. In the end, this interview did not expose some hidden master strategy. It exposed confusion. It exposed overconfidence. And more than anything, it exposed how hard it is to keep selling a neat, moralized version of events when ordinary people are living with messy, very real consequences. That is the problem. That is the reason this exchange sticks with you. Because beneath all the buzzwords and posturing, you could see the disconnect. The voters are asking one set of questions, and too many politicians are still trying to answer a different one. That game only works for so long. So tell me what you think. Did AOC get unfairly pressed here? Or did the interview simply reveal that the talking points fall apart the minute someone pushes back? Drop your take in the comments, because I want to hear where you land on this. And if you want more videos that break down these political moments without the corporate gloss and without the usual spin, hit like, subscribe, and stick around.